Okay, so the bit about titles, a lot of students begin writing titles that just have nothing to do with anything, and I think it's because you don't know what you're writing about yet. So I get titles like My Essay or Essay 1 or something about Marshall. Good time to cough, huh? And it's not effective. So when I pick up your paper and I read your title, I want to know what your paper's about. You may notice that Marshall's titles are exactly like this. If you're getting good at Marshall, you know that you read the title, he catches your attention with something flashy, and he follows up with a subtitle that tells you exactly what that chapter is about. And I want you to do exactly the same thing. For Essay 1, therefore, you have to use a title-subtitle combination. The title captures your attention, the subtitle tells you what the paper's about exactly. And in this case, that'll mean what concept in Marshall are you focusing on? So if you're focusing on, I don't know, what did we cover today? If you're focusing on socially constructed silence and meta-silence, then that should be in the title. Silence should be in the title and or socially constructed. If you're focusing on confirmation bias, then put confirmation bias in the title. Meanwhile, though, you do need to catch people's attention. So here's some various ways to catch people's attention on the title side. You can use a question title. These are all really famous titles for examples here. Is college obsolete? Famous essay. You can definitely use a quotation title. These are the things that Marshall does every single chapter. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but every single chapter title is essentially a key phrase that he borrows from the chapter and sticks up there in the quotation as a quotation in the title, followed by a subtitle that tells you exactly what the chapter's about. Puns work great, and Marshall does use them from time to time. He talks about things like hopium and bright siding and things like that. And puns can be a little cringy, like School Daze, D-A-Z-E, that old Disney movie. But you know what? In marketing, in public relations, in journalism, we use them all the time. People like puns if they're clever. Alliteration, I guess you know I like this because this is a top 10 tips for terrific titles. Alliteration is just a fancy way of saying that you use the same consonant sound over and over again, like T, 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 or A, A. Always alliterate. You can't just, especially if a catchy thesis, a thesis that's unusual, you can put it right there in the title. I don't actually believe this, but imagine writing a paper called Death or Drunk Drivers Deserve the Death Penalty. Oh, it's got alliteration in it too. Contradiction in terms title is one of my favorites. This is kind of the lemonade method. You put the lemon and the sugar together. You put two words together that don't usually belong together. Famous book about the Vietnam War, A Bright and Shining Lie. Symbolic title, famous example, the wonderful 20th century novel, The Color Purple. Humorous title, you can tell the whole story from this. Another stupid Disney movie, but they make good examples. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Now you can write the script. West with the Night, which you would never know without a subtitle, was about the early days of aviation in Africa. So always add that subtitle. So again, the title catches your attention, draws you towards the thesis, makes you say, what's that? The subtitle tells you exactly what's going on. Getting Even catches your attention. Nice little pun from American slang. Love and Loss in the novels of Jane Austen. That tells you what's going on in the paper. All right. So when you write about Marshall, if you're writing up confirmation bias, then some sort of pun or joke or question or whatever about confirmation bias followed by a direct statement in the subtitle about what your paper has to do with confirmation bias and keyword climate change. Now, in terms of brief but brilliant intros, you know what? It's almost exactly the same little lecture. Inexperienced writers do often tend to start their essays with very spineless generalizations. I think there are two reasons for this. First of all, you don't know what you're writing about yet, so you introduce everything and nothing at the same time. It's almost like you had to introduce somebody at a big lecture series, and you don't know who you're introducing. So you have this kind of, well, somebody's going to get up here to talk to you about something, but I'm not quite sure who it is, and I don't even know if they're male or female or whatever. That doesn't really work. So you need to figure out what your thesis is before you ever sit down to write your intro. What are you introducing? Then you need to grab the reader's attention. Don't just start out mumbling. And here's ways that real writers do this all the time. And you definitely see Marshall doing this. You can lead with a question. And I don't mean a silly question or an obvious question. I mean a question that's really provocative and drives and draws people in. My very generic example here, nothing to do with Marshall, ask a provocative original question which readers can't resist answering. You can start with a quote. So these are the same two things I told you about titles. Start with a question, start with a quote. And when I say the intro, I mean the first 2 or 3 sentences. That's all I mean, too. Not the first 2 or 3 pages. So you're really trying to write 2 or 3 sentences that grab the reader's attention, drag them directly towards your thesis. If you're writing about confirmation bias, you need an intro that's about confirmation bias. In fact, I'd put it in the title and in the intro. If you're writing about socially constructed silence, I would put socially constructed silence in the title or the subtitle and silence in the intro. Why not? That's what you're introducing. If you're introducing, well, whatever else it might be, wellhead and tailpipe, which we'll read about later in this week, or many of the other concepts, put the concept in the intro, put these concepts in the title, put them in both. That way I know what the paper's about. Humor works great as long as it's not offensive, so watch out that you don't offend people. But if you can be funny, of course, people love that. Have you ever been to a funeral where somebody starts out with something funny? It actually happens a lot, and it makes you laugh and remember the person that you lost. It puts everybody at ease. So even in a very serious situation, humor, if used well, can work wonders. Telling stories is a favorite way to go, and Marshall often starts that way. He'll say, oh, here I am in Bastrop, Texas, or here I am trying to strike up a climate conversation with people in America. So you can definitely use stories, and it comes to many students very naturally. Storytelling is something we all do pretty well. Using sensory descriptions, which you'll remember from the brainstorming tools, making people feel, what is it, what does this thing you're talking about taste like or smell like or feel like on your skin or feel like in your stomach or feel like in terms of what you hear and what you speak and what you see. Just straight out spitting out your thesis, especially if it's what I would call a shocker thesis, because it'll grab people's attention. Marshall and other writers frequently start with a fascinating factoid. And by factoid, I mean, at first you may not know what this has to do with anything, like some little random thing that happened in 1798. And then you realize, oh, but it has everything to do with the bystander effect, because here's the bystander effect in 1798. Contradictions and comparisons, I talked about this with titles also. This is the lemonade method, where you combine 2 words that don't usually belong together or 2 concepts that don't usually belong together. Here's one I bet you haven't thought of, but I bet you can grasp instantly. This is a favorite. Try this one out. Tell the readers to imagine that they're someplace. Imagine, if you're writing about the bystander effect, imagine that you're witnessing a hate crime on a minibus. You're on the minibus, no one's saying anything. Someone's attacking a person of color, a woman, somebody from a racial or religious minority, and no one's saying anything. And the person's getting attacked, and you're thinking, should I do something? Should I do something? Should I do something? Notice how I use the word you. So this is where you say to the reader, imagine you are on that minibus. Imagine that you don't know whether you should speak up. Imagine you are there. And the you are there really draws people in. Now again, I'm talking about 2 or 3 sentences, wham, hit them with the thesis. But that's what you need to do. And finally, definitions work great as long as they're not silly definitions. This isn't middle school, so I would not recommend starting out with Wikipedia or dictionary.com. Those are okay references, but they sound very basic. A well-chosen non-generic definition, something that sort of like wakes people up, maybe from the American Psychological Association, quoting experts instead of just Wikipedia. Or maybe my mama once said, you better shop around, would work pretty well too. So those are your choices. I want you to notice again that these are pretty much the same things twice. Question title, question intro. Quotation title, quotation intro. That doesn't mean you need to use the same technique. It does mean that the things that catch people's attention are the same both times. So here's my challenge to you. When I pick up your paper, I want to see a great title. I don't want to see my essay, essay 1, my paper about Marshall. I want to see something that grabs my attention, drags me toward the thesis, and then I want to read a couple sentences that do the same thing. And then I'll be begging to read your thesis, which is what you want me to be doing if I'm going to give you an A on your paper. Thanks for listening. Can't wait to hear your reactions. Can't wait to see the papers when they come. It's only 4 or 5 days away till they're actually formally due. All right. Scott, Dr. Scott, over and, if I can get out of here, over and out.